How in the world are we going to speak about democracy when a tiny portion of society controls the financial and the material resources of society? How can you have a democratic system? For instance, the United States is the best example. If 1 or 2 or 3% of the population has the vast majority of wealth in society, how can you have a democracy? Because economic power is translated into political influence. That's been a lesson throughout history. So in the United States, the mechanism is that the wealthy and the powerful are able to finance electoral campaigns. If you want to be a viable candidate in any major election in the United States, you need vast resources. You need millions and millions of dollars. The last elections, how many hundreds of millions of dollars were spent by each candidate in the last presidential elections. And unless you're independently wealthy, like Ross Perot, and you have your own hundreds of millions of dollars to invest, you need to turn to those in society that can supply these resources. You need to turn to the wealthy and the powerful. And that means that you subordinate your program to the needs of the wealthy and the powerful. That's the particular mechanism in the United States. But wherever we look in the world, we see that economic power translates into political influence.
In order to have a proper appreciation of the American economic system, we must know how the national income is divided in America. In other words, we must examine the distribution of the great wealth produced through the operation of American capitalism.
Each person represents 1% of American households. Each dollar represents 1% of America's privately owned wealth. The top 10% of American households own 72% of the wealth. The bottom 90% only owns 28% of the wealth. If we just look at the top 1%, they own 37% of the wealth. The top 1% owns more than the bottom 90%. The top 1% owns more than the bottom 90%.
The plutocracy, those very wealthy people, those one, it's about 0.04, one fraction of 1%. It's less than 1%. When you hear, oh, the top 1% owns 40%, it's less than 1%. It's about 145,000 individuals. They make up this super rich class. You know, Gore Vidal was telling us that when Ronald Reagan went rushing over to the Bohemian Grove and said, I want to crack at the presidency now. I'm governor of California, it's my time. They said, no, Ronnie, you got to wait. 1972, that's going to be tricky, Dick. Richard Nixon, he stepped back. He wasn't going to take on the power of the wealth. He's serving that power.
Mr. Reagan is for freedom, and he is for the people.
When people talk about the rich in this country, they really don't seem to have any idea how rich the rich really are. The very top is that fraction I just said of 1%. That's where it goes off the charts. The analogy is that if we could represent our income and wealth by playing blocks, children's playing blocks, each block represents $1,000. Most of us would have a pile that would go up maybe anywhere from 6 to 10 or 15 feet at most. But for that top super rich, this is Heilbronner's analogy, the piles of blocks would go up many times over the Eiffel Tower, many times higher than the Eiffel Tower. It would go out of sight.
Concentrations of wealth and power are fundamentally anti-democratic. That whenever you've got a monarchy or a giant corporation like the East India Company, you have a force within society that's going to dominate and dictate and control.